once you start to look into getting really good at Final Fantasy XIV, you may get yourself introduced to things like DPS logs, statistics, and rankings. The initial reaction to seeing this can often be that feeling in your stomach that maybe you chose wrong. Your favorite job in Final Fantasy XIV is the wrong choice. You become acutely aware of how strong you aren't, and it might make you feel like you have to apologize for playing your job when playing particularly difficult content like a Savage Raid. Now, I am here to tell you that no, there is no such thing as a wrong choice when choosing the job you wish to play, for you see, all jobs are viable in all content. Even if some jobs have some slight advantages over others due to their kit, it is possible to do all content in Final Fantasy XIV that you wish, regardless of what job you choose to play, with of course the exception that if you choose to main Blue Mage, I have some terrible news for you regarding level 71 plus content. To expand on this subject some more, I wish to look just slightly broader on DPS logs, just briefly, to give you some perspective. And then we will talk about all of the advantages that there could potentially be to playing your favorite job, regardless of whatever much DPS it happens to do. Now then, this, as you may know, is called the rDPS ranking statistic of FF logs. What this means is that anything a specific job brings to the raid is attributed to that job itself, meaning that all the damage the dancer does, as well as the damage it allows its dance partner to do, is attributed to the dancer, as well as other buffs like Technical Step. This means that while a job like Samurai is capable of doing the most damage, and that is how it will show on a DPS meter, keep in mind that third-party tools are officially illegal, so use DPS meters at your own risk. However, in the rDPS logs, the dancer will get credit for all the damage it helped the Samurai to do. This also means that, for example, the Reaper job might on a DPS meter do more damage than a Dragoon. But because of the sheer amount of raid buffs the Dragoon brings to the table, the Dragoon can drag Goon itself higher up. Anyway, oftentimes, people can get a bit lost in this graph of bars and get too focused on how far to the right some jobs are compared to others. But you should keep in mind that this graph is adjusted to be easier to read in detail. In reality, if we included the full graph from 0 to 100, it would look more like this. You may notice that the distance between Monk and Machinist seems a lot more reasonable now. It should be said that Machinist, at the bottom, on average, only does 9% less DPS than those at the top, even if the statistics might make you feel like it is much worse. Now, whether that lower DPS is 2, 5 or 10% isn't actually that important because content is balanced around all jobs being able to beat it. Additionally, this graph that we are viewing right now is specifically showcasing the average performance of successful kills of a boss with each job at the time of viewing in Abyssal Savage. It is a very specific ranking and a lot of factors can play in that are not clearly visible. A particular thing that could play in is the fact that the vast majority of the DPS tracked on these logs are single target. Meaning that if, say, hypothetically, Machinist had the highest area of effect DPS in the game, this would not show on this graph. Which conveniently segues us to the much more interesting subject of this video. All jobs are viable in all content, some are better than others at some content, but we only really track which job is best in the minute detail for Extremes, single target DPS race, Savage, single target DPS race, and Ultimates, single target DPS race. But there are other things in the game than just single target DPS race. For example, let's say that your raid static isn't that hardcore, you're just a group of friends, and you all know that while you are all capable of doing the damage, your healers are having a bit of trouble keeping up with the healing necessary to keep your raid up. Now, this is not a problem because, incidentally, you have a paladin tank who can use clemency, oh no DPS loss, and you happen to have a Reaper among your DPS whose arcane crest really bolsters your raid team's ability to get up between raid-wide AoE. Your mage also happens to be a red mage, which is a blessing for any raid team that isn't able to perfectly consistently beat every boss without deaths. For your raid team, these jobs are incredibly helpful because their defensive utilities are exactly what you need to cover for the weaknesses in your lineup. But if you were to just look at the DPS rankings, clearly you're making a mistake here, surely. Not really. You'll be just fine, especially because if your healers eventually improve their performance in terms of healing, then this extra help will cover you when you do make a mistake, and otherwise your healers get more breathing room to attack more. And even if one day your raid team as a whole feels like you don't need all this utility that a Paladin, Reaper and Red Mage brings to the table, does it really matter that much? These three players have played their favorite job all this time, and I can almost guarantee you that if you play your favorite job and not quote-unquote the best job, then you will do better. Whether doing better means doing more damage, or being more effective at dealing with mechanics, or using your utility options to their full potential, it does not matter because you are strong enough to beat that boss anyway. Besides, there are other types of content. There are other factors to measure by, they just happen to be much more abstract and difficult to translate into a number that you can read and compare against each other. Machinist is the king and queen of the deep dungeons. Free mobility paired with obscene instant burst, not to mention slows, binds and an interrupt and peloton, are all things that are far more valuable in a deep dungeon than in a savage raid encounter where most of these things don't even work. Take any encounter where there are mobs that die throughout the fight. Suddenly, the Reaper automatically increases in value. It is able to generate its soul gauge at hyperspeed, and this leaves even less gaps in its high damage potential. This is especially clear in dungeons, just as an example, where the Reaper's sturdy armor paired with Arcane Crest and the melee roll actions also helps it to be one of the better DPS to have if something goes wrong and the tank dies. If any DPS were capable of surviving off tanking, it would be the Reaper. Ultimately, there are advantages to bringing any job to your party, and there are other things to care about than just DPS. In this single target DPS race focused mindset that you may end up in when reading these graphs, it can be very easy to forget this. Given that you only need to kill each of these savage raid bosses once each week, I would personally prefer to cut it a bit closer to the enrage timer if it means we are less likely to wipe due to bringing more defensive utility options to make the run smoother and easier overall. This is a game after all, so your first priority should be to have fun. And if optimizing this much ends up taking the fun out of it, is it really worth it? Anyway, who really knows? Maybe we'll discover that the best jobs for doing these newly released Criterion and variant dungeons turns out to be more defensive oriented jobs with a heavier focus on area of effect attacks. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found it helpful or inspiring, please consider leaving a like. You can also subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you have any questions or anything you wish to discuss regarding this subject, please do leave a comment. Fun fact, before Shadowbringers, certain jobs were capable of keeping full uptime of debuffs that increased damage done by certain damage types, slashing, blunt and piercing. The piercing debuff was exclusive to Dragoon, which caused some problems when the party bonus required you to bring a ranged physical, and both Bard and Machinist did piercing damage. This caused a lot of problems when a raid team wanted to optimize. I believe the slashing debuff was exclusive to Warrior, with all tanks, Samurai and Ninja depending on it. And while the blunt debuff was exclusive to Monk, only itself and mages and healers did blunt damage. It is probably a good thing for party variety that these debuffs were removed in Shadowbringers.